All right, and we're live. Um, Welcome, Dan, to the first ever Hacker Bio crowdcast, live stream, and podcast. This is the first time we're doing it, so we're probably going to be adjusting along the way and learning how to better kind of set up the format. But just as an intro to our audiences right now, the purpose here is to talk with a number of folks in the industry who are either technologists, developers, hackers, programmers, however they label themselves, and just talk about the human element of software and what does it take to be successful in this industry. We're not going to be talking about frameworks. We're not going to be talking about languages. We're not going to be talking about products and services. There's enough of that going around. And I think the one thing missing from a lot of these things is talking about the human element and the people behind those products and companies that we all use. So I'd like to welcome Dan Shaw. Dan, I'll probably won't be able to do justice in giving an intro on your behalf. So maybe you can be the one to give the intro and start off the conversation by telling us about who you are and what you do.
Great. I'm kind of a weird egg of business person in tech world with a passion for community. I've been around in the Node ecosystem since very early days, basically followed the evolution of the platform. Earliest days, whenever there was be done or we were getting together and doing something in the community, I always said yes. I always had the privilege and the support of my family to be able to plug in, and then I leveraged that that position and that success into forming one of the earliest consulting companies around Node.js called the Node Firm. We brought together some of the leading technologists, there, kind of the broad spectrum of folks that were plugged into developing the early Node.js platform, and helped businesses, get access to that expertise and, understand, how best to use the Node.js platform. Then in 2014, founded a company called NodeSource, which basically at the time, folks were, great, excited to get some consulting around it, but folks were beginning to make that 10-year technology bet around Node.js, and they were looking for a Node.js company. So NodeSource was explicitly founded to be an enterprise built around offering products for businesses, largely enterprise businesses, leveraging the Node.js platform. And with that, as far as I'm concerned, if you ask my end game in building those businesses, they were largely to not only provide those services to the marketplace, but for me, it was really important also to provide opportunities to folks that were working on the Node.js platform, building Node.js, to have employment that enabled them to continue to follow their passions. So it's always been a two-sided marketplace for me when that with those concerns, and enabling the folks that are giving so much of their time and effort to the platform to develop sustainable careers around the open source projects that have given me so much and given a lot as well. It's been one of the driving forces in the last decade of my career.
Cool. You have so many things there that I want to unravel and dive into. Maybe start with the a lot of people refer to themselves as developers. Some people refer to themselves as engineers. You're kind of in the business world and the technology world. Like, there's a lot of terms going around: hacker, developer, engineer, technologist. What do you associate yourself with the most, and what do you think the difference mainly is in these kind of roles and or definitions that people kind of gravitate to?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Typically refer to myself as a programmer, though almost none of my day-to-day time is spent as a programmer these days. Over the past year, I've been consulting. Now I'm kicking off a new enterprise, so I'll be back in more formal executive role. Like I'm the CEO of my single member LLC. Yeah, hoorah! That is not a real executive role. The executive role is much more building out those processes, building out the core structure of values that you apply into an enterprise, and structure the the value system, both personal values and business value, and how you derive value with money. That is, that's really where I spend my time these days. It's less in figuring out how to make a code work, and much more in figuring out how I can build systems to enable people to work on the things that they love, and do that in a sustainable way.
So help me draw a line here, because how did you start? You started out as a programmer.
Yep.
And now you're taking a lot of, it sounds like you're taking a lot of these lessons and practices and problem solving, and applying them on a business and kind of consulting and building products and building companies that are human oriented. So help me draw that line. Tell me about where you started and how you started as a programmer, and then let's talk about how that kind of transitions to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've over the arc of my career, I've gone back and forth between that individual contributor role and a leadership role. If I go way back before programming career, coming out of high school, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was very much into drama, and not the Node.js community kind of drama. The drama and acting and such not. And in that role, I found my sweet spot in directing. So the thing about acting that I loved most was this meta strategic role of helping others be successful in their craft. And that is something that's continued through the arc of my career. I started really working and applying myself in technology in the early 80s. Back then it was desktop publishing, and laying out grid systems on paper, and going through and getting 4 color proofs of that, and having my color wheel, and looking at the the color proofs, and making sure that it was close as originally intended. And very shortly thereafter, the emergence of the web really came about, and I continued my cross-cutting sort of engagement there, but more and more everything that I got pulled into was web related. Folks wanted the emerging technologies, wanted web stuff. I had a company that was called Media Design, and did brochureware, which was websites stuffed into CD-ROMs, because downloading assets across the internet was too expensive. So to build the rich internet experiences that you wanted to share with folks, you would put it on SneakerNet and share physical media. So
with Flash and auto runs and all that fun stuff.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. And it was exciting and also really goofy looking back at it. The amount of brochureware websites that I created back then was ridiculous, and it's funny to see that that's still the bread and butter of so much of what we put on the web. So that hasn't changed, but some of the underlying technologies of what we do has changed. So early on, I built out a small business. I had a few people, working for me, and then .com sort of came and absolutely eviscerated everything that I was doing. I went from I wasn't making a ton of money. Let me share numbers, since it's always such a hard thing to tease out. I was giving several thousands of dollars on a contract, and I went down to folks trying to get $500 for a full web experience, and this was the late 90s. So adjust a little bit for inflation, but I was doing small business stuff and cranking things out. But this that huge order of magnitude dip in what I could contract for what I was doing just meant that I basically couldn't take the meeting to go and talk to you about your brochure web experience, and I had to sort of revisit everything that I was doing. Could no longer sustain a business around that, and I needed to fundamentally rethink what I was doing with my life.
And so I do share a lot of that history as well, building brochure kind of CD-ROM based fun memory, going back down the memory lane. It's interesting, like you said, you went to drama school, you recognize like there's a pattern there that you kind of identified with, that you're kind of perhaps internalizing the value that you're getting from it, and building software and how you're helping others with it. What is first question I think is, did you go to school for any of this, or were you all self-taught?
So I was self-taught, not autodidact, up through that turning point. And, at this point, at this juncture, so I was, most of my way through my 20s at this point. And so at this point, I actually went back to school. So I was like, all right, reset. Like, I don't know, what's going on, or how to, really, thread things forward, because what I've been doing was no longer financially viable. Let's go deal with one of the big pain points that I had to deal with. In Silicon Valley, there's some conventional wisdom around how you can go and get a top career without having a degree. Mostly applies to white men, but so that was a thing in Europe. That was totally not a thing. I had the fact that I was an American, and I was ahead of the curve in terms of technology was compelling, but that's all I had going for me.
How was that? Like you said, there was a moment there. Like I want to double click on that and dive deeper. If somebody's listening to this podcast later and they're thinking about getting into tech, or they're in some arts program or some non-tech program they're looking at our industry, they're looking at how financially successful it is. They're looking at the kind of opportunities it affords us. To your point, there might be some different kind of level of perhaps privilege, depends on the country, the location, the address, the kind of ethnicity they may be from. That's for sure is an issue, or perhaps for all industries, not just ours. But if somebody's in that situation and looking around and trying to figure out, well, what do I want to do, right? It sounds like you had a transformative moment at one point where you said, hey, there's something here. What was that exact moment, and how did it surface?
Wow. So I was at a crossroads, and for me, that the spectrum of what I'd been doing was, brand and tech, and it really wasn't, one or the other. Now the aspects of design and technology are often segmented as separate. But as an autodidact coming from a design background and delivering web experiences, I was just looking to deliver the best possible experience that I could with the skills that I had. So for me, I was just as passionate about marketing and sort of delivering marketing value as I was in the technical implementation. So for me, the fundamental decision came on whether I wanted to go down a marketing path or whether I wanted to go down a technical path. And for me, I'd spent the better part of the previous nearly a decade in more of a design world, and forward. And on the design side of things, the reference points were like Chat Daily. I'm probably butchering the name. Apple's agency of record. And at the time, Think Different was the operative Apple campaign, and there's just really incredible brand experiences that folks like that were delivering, and that was cool. And I saw like a real opportunity for progression and outsized career growth there. But there's also a lot of downside risk. My analysis at the time, and still, in my opinion, holds of marketing and brand is that it's lumpy. There isn't as much of an opportunity for continuous progression. You can achieve top career in that sphere, and then have the tide of what's popular completely shift on you, and end up in a situation where no, we're not doing realistic rendered icons anymore. Your services, now we're just doing flat. Your services are no longer interesting and engaging to the ecosystem. And the possibility for for drop off is absolutely brutal. And it's embarrassing to admit the other end of the spectrum. But what I was looking at as where the success metrics were, I was looking at SAP and SAP consultants, and they were getting $500 an hour, and I was like, yeah, maybe I should go follow that trajectory. It seems like there in tech there's a bit more of a continuously increasing step ladder of with greater proficiency, with greater experience, you can translate that into better roles over time without the extreme backslides in your valuation. So I chose to go down the tech path, and went back to school where I finished my undergraduate degree in computer science, and then got a master's degree in software engineering.
Cool. So
midway through my career.
Yeah, it sounds like you've identified the opportunity. You've invested in yourself to go back and better yourself and build that kind of a baseline of experiences that you need from like the software engineering background and education. And then you're mentioning the step ladder and how the technology side of things is continuously evolving. But could it easily be a trap? You could just go into a path and never evolve yourself and never go back and do what you did of reinvigorate and relearn and reset your knowledge base. So like, how did you do that over the years, and how did you go from going back to school, learning about software engineering, and to being the godfather of Node.js as you are today? That's a big claim, right? And that's you do play an active role in this community, and you're a lot of people's jobs and lives are because of something you've started. But that's an important question, because a lot of people might go into school, learn computer science, or do a code school program or something like that, get into the job market, and then find it very hard to continue climbing that step ladder. Not in the context of promotions and roles and kind of seniority, but in the context of continuously reinventing yourself, because technology is about reinvention and rebuilding things. So how did you accomplish that? What was the journey for you in that regard look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to being impatient and really wanting to continue learning. I've gone and sought out opportunities where I want to figure out how to progress. I felt like I didn't have the CS basics underneath myself for the fundamentals. I understood how to build applications and how to build experiences for for end users, and that was not grounded in having that formal training of the CS background. And then going through that CS experience, folks were consistently kind of blown away by the fact that I actually had real world experience, and a lot of people coming out of academia had never had hands-on experience. And so, when you're, trying to share something and apply that to, I'm grappling with this problem, and, here's the theory. The theory and reality aren't quite lining up. Folks that are only spending their time focusing on the theory, look at that sort of questions like, like my theory doesn't help support my decisions around the real world, because you can't make those determinations of theory, using theory when it comes to the real world context. The real world is life experiences. It's all fun and games until the enemy punches you in the face, and then you're dealing with reality, and those sorts of experiences. Theory really can't prepare you for. So blending appreciation of the yes, you do need to to understand the context. Yes, you need to understand the history, and by doing that, you can bring to bear better understanding of how to make a reasonably good solution, and then validating as you go forward. In my experience, apathy is the single greatest thing that I've sought to avoid in my career. And I've had friends that have chosen to stick out their time in a startup that was dysfunctional when most other people have left, and then I've seen them have to leave tech altogether for like a couple years just because they were so absolutely burnt out. So I know this comes from an immense place of privilege that I can stop and go somewhere else. But I've also prioritized that early on in my relationship with the companies that I've worked for, and tried to get out of situations where I'm not being fulfilled, and if I'm not being fulfilled as an individual, then I know that I don't have the right energy, the right mojo to give and to share with others. And this is probably the last 5 years or so that I've really gotten to that level of appreciation. It's also, by the way, the period in my career where I've really gone from an individual contributor to a manager. So, more management role. So, understanding that I can get gratification from the success of others has enabled me to make this transition from an individual contributor. And I went through lead engineer, director of engineering, and then kind of minor startup CEO, CTO roles. And that progression all the way along the way of helping others help themselves, being gratifying. That's where I've kept the direction of my career. Coming out of NodeSource, I really had the opportunity to go back and serve as an individual contributor, but decided that it wouldn't be the biggest impact that I'd be able to have. Going back and sort of diving into an individual contributor role. So I've focused on kind of keeping what I'm doing adjacent to what a traditional executive role is, and then kind of keeping myself in position to go back and do that again.
So it sounds like you went through a journey of a little bit of self-discovery along the way. Like you knew what you were passionate about. You made sure that you were working in places that are healthy to keep sustaining your passion, and not to fall into the apathy kind of mode. Let's say in a big corporation or a big team or even a small startup, people are just working and they're not necessarily deriving value to themselves or other around them. What are the telltale signs, like if somebody is stuck in a rut in that kind of situation? Like you emerged, and you said like it's only in the last 5 years that you started kind of appreciating that. So how many years does it take to get to that point, right? Is that necessarily a path everybody should suffer through in terms of a long time before that self-realization happened? And what sort of advice would you give people who are like stuck in that kind of and unmotivated work mode, or in a place that they're not feeling fulfilled? What are the key things to identify so that people can start kind of restructuring their lives and their careers around their own motivations?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things that we can gravitate towards is connecting to communities around us that we find meaningful. So and that doesn't need to be purely tech. Being connected to a tech community is really helpful for gaining that perspective, right? If I hadn't had peers around me that are also in tech, I wouldn't have had sounding boards of like, am I crazy? I've definitely gone through this, and I know a lot of other of my peers in tech. When presented with situations where either it's managers misunderstanding or intentional mispresentation of something around tech, all kinds of terrible behavior that I've experienced over the years, justified because it was done on behalf of some business goal, business end. No, it's still terrible human behavior, and you owe nobody anything for their shitty behavior. It's there's no reason that a business should be able to hide behind the fact that it's a business and perpetrate things that are poor for its employees. It looks bad on in respect to the brand and the overall quality of the business if a business presents itself that way. And just like human beings being terrible humans elicit negative outcomes from folks, the same expectation I expect with being plugged into the tech community has enabled me to have the perspective of am I sane? What are other people experiencing? And get that validation that I've needed, and the support that is possible from that community to say, hey, you're in this dysfunctional situation. I know we're hiring, and you can build out that safety net of options before you put yourself into a situation where you're living on savings, or you're having to make career choices based only on making sure you have food on the table and you have your needs taken care of.
You're talking about the community, and I think that's definitely a topic I want to talk about, especially in the context of the open source community and the technology community. But one other side of community, and you said this already, is the social group that you surround yourself with. And it doesn't have to be a tech community, right? I get this question a lot. People always ask me things like, where do you get the time to do all these things? And who are you working with to kind of collaborate and build all these kind of initiatives and open source stuff? And the perception, it seems, from kind of the broader audience when they see people who are, let's say, the technology leaders of our industry, people who build frameworks and tools and work at companies like Google and Facebook and are always in the faces of our day-to-day lives as programmers and developers. If you're a Node.js developer, there's a certain group of people that you're probably already always seeing either in GitHub or in Twitter talking about what they're doing and what they're working on. And it seems that they're on all the time. But obviously, that's not the case. They have their personal lives. They have their personal hobbies outside of tech, outside of code. And maybe that's not the question for me. My hobby is coding and programming. But I want to talk about that. Right. You mentioned that social connection. What does that look like for you outside of tech, outside of work, and how does that help you in your tech career?
Yeah, I mean that skill set has become my fundamental sort of modus operandi. That ability to listen, it really comes down to not as much the ability to talk, but the ability to listen, and then through that listening to drive actions. That is the skill set that I've honed over moving into that managerial phase, rather than as an engineer, you're wired to sort of get to the solution as fast as possible, and getting to the solution is probably the most useless thing you can be trying to achieve as a manager. What you really need to do is understand why and be able to communicate why. So when you can get to that essence of why is this person struggling? Why aren't we achieving our goals? And if you step back from the implementation of the thing and listen to where the pain points come up. Maybe the solution is that individual needs to go find a new aspect of their career to work on because they're unfulfilled and never going to be fulfilled in that role. That's a totally acceptable outcome, and then you've liberated that individual, the team, and everybody involved to really focus on what the needs are. And selling, building a startup and selling product, comes down to the same basic skill set of listening to folks' needs and really trying to align the value that you're bringing to those needs. And it's a core motion that I've been able to cultivate and to dig deeper into. I describe myself as an introvert that plays an extrovert on TV. So I see sort of me time, personal time to reflect, to process, to elaborate on things. But I validate in the public sphere to get feedback and to make sure that I'm not getting sort of caught up in my own thoughts. Going out and sharing with the world, building that understanding and getting feedback has been something that has enriched me both personally and mentally and in terms of money, and it's something that I feel like I could continue to do for years to come. It's a gratifying action, and I've gotten reasonably good feedback from others that they find it gratifying too.
It's interesting that you say you're an introvert. The way you positioned, like you're an introvert, but you're an extrovert on the what is it you said, the stage?
I play extrovert on TV, right? Everyone assumes that I'm an extrovert, because I'm fairly gregarious and extremely loud.
Well, I think that's a common thread that I've noticed. I mean, in myself and a lot of other people who are, let's say, the conference speakers, the people who are kind of helping lead the industry in one shape or another. Typically, there's a thread of those individuals are kind of introverts by nature, but it seems that they do kind of, I don't want to call it putting on a face, but they put in the effort of going out there and being social and connecting and kind of sharing that. And that kind of brings that good kind of pivot to the community aspect of these kind of tech communities and these kind of open source world where everybody's playing together on a level playing field, hopefully. The idea that you're a tech leader or you're a person who works at a company, maybe you're a developer, maybe you're a manager, maybe you're a senior person who's building frameworks and tools. Either way, there's this level playing field that everybody can play, right? And there's this idea that everybody can contribute in a meaningful way. It does seem a little bit of intimidating to people to kind of think of how do we get into that? How do we do that, right? I mean, you mentioned your story. You went back to school. You identified you had that entrepreneurial kind of spirit to identify where the opportunities are. And then you got into Node early on. And again, you became the godfather of Node.js as kind of the history there goes. But it is intimidating. And there's an aspect of people who were in it before, like let's say yourself, maybe myself. I mean, other people who've been there even before both of us. They got in early, right? They got in where there was not that much, let's call it noise or things happening all around. And they've made a name for themselves and they made a contribution that is meaningful to the rest of the industry. Where do people start today? How is it? What's the barrier of entry, and how does people effectively contribute to such a massive ecosystem of technology and technologists in a meaningful way? Do you think it's too late? Do you think there's opportunities? What does that look like? And most importantly, how does this help back to the individual level? How does this help you as a person? And how does it help you, not just on a career point of view? Like we can all agree, being active in the open source community advances your career. But going back to your point about what your passion is in this industry and being able to help others and provide value to others, how does being part of the open source community help you kind of achieve that kind of passion back?
Right. I mean, I had the great opportunity to step in and be involved directly. So after like 3 or 4 years of kind of waving the executive wand of like, yes, you folks get to go work on Node open source stuff, but I've got to go and like do a thing. I had the opportunity to go and work firsthand and plug into the Node.js community. So that was fantastic. The the stark reality of open source is that there's no one really guiding the ship, and that is challenging for folks to really wrap their heads around. You can go in and you get involved, and you have to sort of weave this weird balance between being a part of the status quo and helping out. And I probably got myself in trouble more often than folks would expect for something. But I come from experience and know that I am going to get in trouble for doing things and that eventually it'd work itself out. But that's probably the biggest thing that in a large community that folks aren't quite prepared for is the natural amount of sort of aversion to change that people have, and wherever you plug yourself in to changing things, you're going to ruffle some feathers, and by enough and kind of having an idea of what I wanted to go do. I just kept on perseverance is probably the single biggest trait that you can and should nurture as a technologist. And that applies to open source, that applies to programming, that applies to business. If you can, tap into, whatever it is that enables you to persevere and, do what you want to go do, then, that'll enable you to go through and, you still have to listen. You still have to, get feedback from folks on, hey, is this okay? Your community is like 10 million folks, across a global community. So, if you go and start, introducing anything, whether it's, positive or negative, you're going to get feedback, and, just listening to that feedback and, consistently, following through and trying to understand, whether that thing that you're doing is valuable to others, and if you can continue doing that. I was able to introduce both the user feedback initiative and help introduce the mentorship program, and both of those I absolutely pissed people off because I gone and done some simple procedure wrong. I should have asked XYZ person along the way, and I didn't know to do that. And I as much as possible tried to encourage folks, rather than just sort of correcting me, let's write it down, and let's figure out a way so someone with my level of experience and privilege, who's probably going to get forgiven, for making the wrong choice. If that's someone who's newer to the community and trying to get their bearings, folks won't necessarily stick it out to to realize the end game.
So it sounds like there are challenges, and it's not a like a lot of other things in life, it's not an easy path. The question is this something everybody should be part of? If you're a software technologist, a programmer, a hacker, a developer, do you need to be part of the open source community? Is there any value to it, or is it just a personal choice?
So I've gotten so much benefit out of the open source world that, I can't not continue to invest in it. But I've definitely seen situations where folks haven't felt like they, have the time mostly in their lives to dedicate to open source and community, and view programming as a much more of a career choice, and what they're getting paid for, and then they're done with that. I've always struggled personally to identify with that. And if I'm being super honest, to be respectful of that, since community is such a strong anchor for me. But that is the right path for some people. I don't feel like being forced into community is the right path for everybody. But it's a way to amplify the successes that you've had, and find new peer groups. That sort of community. So there's the broader community of where kind of fame space exists, and people know your name and various things like that. That's cool, and it has a certain value to it. But the far more important community that I've found over the years is like-minded individuals who share your passions, and that I found the best way to connect with those people are to be active in my communities, and through that I've been able to connect with folks across the industries, and even in some subject areas that I'm interested in, but are not necessarily sort of my home communities. But being out there and by engaging and sharing what little I know with the rest of the world, I'm able to connect with folks throughout the industry, and have them share in kind, basically that experience that they're compelled from, and to find new directions and areas for growth, based on having new perspectives in that broader community sense.
So we're gonna do a hard pivot now. Just a couple of quick questions, and then I want to go back and talk about the unicorn, because so we talked about a lot of things. We learned about your motivations, how you got into it, the path you went on. You talked about going from the hands-on development to the kind of leadership roles and building businesses and opportunities. The one quick question that I want to start closing with, and then we'll do a quick fire round. Should people learn how? Should everybody be a coder? Should everybody learn how to code? And the follow-up is, is this industry something people should really consider and be part of it, whether starting as a developer and getting into more leadership roles, or just being in the tech industry at all?
So should everybody code is one of those ironic things, because as long as I've been in the educational space, so an educated programmer, I was taught that I'm going to program myself out of a career. Mm-hmm. So academia teaches me basically, no, you shouldn't be doing this thing, because smart people message from academia. Also, I think it's totally fucking wrong. I'm sorry, we are looking for a non-explicit rating. I blew that cachet.
Here goes the sponsorship.
There goes the sponsorship. But no, it is absolutely something that is going to be around, and has been around through the entire arc of my that specter of hey, this is going to end some point, has been around, and I haven't seen any reduced need. Technologists, if anything, it's increased. Every aspect of our lives is impacted by technology, and I think the awareness in around how things are implemented is something that would benefit many of us as we increasingly are saturated with technology in our lives. Do I think that everyone should get involved? I want to see us culturally invest more in the single biggest problem that we deal with in tech is not technology, it's humans. And what I think we need to do in technology is bring more science and more human sciences and more history into our ecosystem, and really begin a more holistic craft into what we're doing, because we have invited technology into every moment, every minimal aspect of our lives, and the single greatest way to understand how dangerous technology is to go and build it.
That's a very, very good point. Let's go through some rapid fire questions. Do you prefer working in a group or on your own?
So I like brainstorming in a group, and am most functional to really produce output in isolation.
All right. What was the last nonfiction book you read?
Wise Man's Fear.
What is that about?
It is about a gypsy who becomes a mage and journey through life. It's did you say nonfiction or fiction?
Nonfiction.
Sorry. Nonfiction. Shit. Okay. Sorry, that was fiction. Last nonfiction. Oh God, I've been reading all business books, and I just finished a book called Exponential Organizations. It's super businessy.
How much of your time is spent in, percentage-wise, how much of your time is spent on personal life versus business/technology work?
So probably very high on business and technology. I'd probably put it as high as 80-20. That sounds about right. I try to spend all of my weekends offline, and that allows me to delineate as clearly as I can, and yeah. So it's a pretty high number that I'm plugged in. Most of my work is thinking, so it's the amount of think space that's dedicated there, and it's a pretty high percentage.
They're pretty invested, basically, in the industry. What does your workstation/desk look like on a daily basis? Are you working out of a laptop? Do you have your own kind of setup? Is it organized, disorganized?
So I attend. So I'll have workspace. Right now I'm at the house, and I've got a laptop, and I have a backpack with basically all my kit in it, and that is functional for me wherever I am in the world. So I don't have a dedicated desktop space and a mobile space. It's all sort of optimized around that mobile space and that machine that anchors all.
Because you travel a lot, and then you're always either on a plane or in some foreign country, as far as I can tell.
Right, right. I actually spend way more time these days on my phone than anything else. I get the vast majority of my technology work done right on my phone.
Cool. Do you listen to music while you work, and what kind of music do you listen to?
I do. I tend to more go towards electronica. I'm looking for something that's going to get me in the zone and not get in the way. And for me, electronic music provides that right rhythm and just sort of non-invasiveness.
Cool. And then the last question, and then I want to hear the story about the unicorn, the angry unicorn, is if you weren't doing this, what other profession would you be working in? Is that back to the drama and acting, or something else? What's your number 2 choice?
So today, and this is a turning point. Basically, back in 2016, I describe what I do oftentimes as open source politician, and as we've seen the political state in the U.S. kind of devolve and go into like La La Land and be absolutely atrocious. I don't believe in pointing fingers and saying, someone else should do better at this thing. I believe that, if we see something that needs to be improved, that it's our responsibility to do something about it. And so I've very much been contemplating, the political sphere. I think we're woefully under provisioned in the technology world with folks in politics that know an iota about technology. We're dealing with technology in every aspect of our lives, and we honestly will need to have started legislating about technology over the past at least decade. And the legislation that we have pulled out has obviously been written by folks who don't, understand anything about, technology. Trying to, to lock down, technology's evolution while, not understanding, where the lies are already in technology. So if I wasn't doing this, I think I'd plug myself into the political system a bit more, and I've tried to really look for opportunities where I can get engaged with my civic duties and take that 80% focus that I've had and broaden that out and spend some of that time focusing on not just on the open source communities, but my community in general, where I live, and it's being unstable impacts my ability to do the things that I really enjoy in life.
I can see that thread from what you started talking about, how your motivation and helping others and finding solutions that help others kind of lends its way to the political sphere as well, and being active in the community, like you said. Going back to the the introduction at first, at least, what I would have opened with and said, if I know one thing about Dan Shaw, it's going to be the angry unicorn and the scarves. So
I wore the
always
scarf.
scarf.
Just
So like, it'd be very interesting to see a political campaign for you in the future where it's the unicorn and the scarf as the icons of that campaign. And it would certainly get my vote if I was able to vote in the US. But like, tell us a little bit, what's the story with the unicorn? And that's probably something that everybody recognizes you through, but it's also the GitHub fail whale version as well.
right. So the unicorn comes from an old blog post. Dave Walsh, who is one of the MooTools core developers, had a blog post back in the late 90s about unicorns, about folks that were trying to hire these unicorn developers. And what a unicorn was at that time was a designer who could code, and so that was this identity that I carried into tech, and in particular the angry unicorn. I have this sort of plunging brow line, so even if I'm happy. I just still kind of have resting judgy face, and so the angry unicorn very much covers that basis, and I'm particularly enjoy the fact that it's like pink and rainbowy. I'm blues and dark grays. With the exception of my scarf wearing individual, and I love the irony of this angry pink rainbow unicorn being this symbol for me. So it's the technical story of the icon is it's literally that 500 page icon. I loved it one day and I was like, all right, I'm gonna yank it down and make it my own. I flipped the avatar to have it facing in the other direction, also to protect my butt around IP and changing and modifying the thing just a little bit because I didn't know where the source was. Then I moved to San Francisco and had the opportunity to meet many of the GitHub founders and the early team members, and no one knew what the heck this image was. Like I would get frequently unicorn? I don't even know what that is. Like, come on. Every developer on the planet knows what this damn pink unicorn is. But folks inside of GitHub had no idea. Wow. It's a 500 page for GitHub's Unicorn server. So Unicorn is an HTTP proxy for Rails systems, and it is. As I found out a few years later, literally clip art for Angry Unicorn.
Wow.
So you totally anticlimactic. I was like, the image had been my avatar for years, and I was like, oh man, like I hope one day I can find the artist, and all I have is this 250 by 250 rendered image of it. And it's like I would love to make stickers and find that and yet Jan Leinart of JSConf U fame had it as this opening image of a presentation with this watermark over top of it, and was like, what? Yeah, no. That's a what? And so I immediately went to PhotoSite or whatever the thing was, and licensed the artwork for $9 or something like that. After I was like, I will find you great internet artist that created the sublime angry unicorn. and I never found the artist. I did find the original source, and I have the full vector. So the DShaw stickers that you can get by DMing me your address on Twitter. That is something that comes after having the vector artwork, and so I do have that finally. But it's a fun symbol. I get stopped in the airport, and I'll put down my thing. And there's this on the back of my phone, and I've gotten things like, "Oh, so you're a brony?" Like, I just say yes. It's probably less complicated than explaining the reality. Sure, I'm a brony.
That's a fun story. Well, then you're the OG designer developer unicorn. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us and sharing your story and telling us more about your kind of background and your advice to people in this industry. I think there's a lot of valuable lessons to pick from here. And maybe we'll have you back again and deep dive into any one of these topics. Thank you so much.
Awesome.